Well, hello, everybody. I'm Georgia, and we're going to be talking about translations and readers, all you readers. In the 20 years I have worked in publishing, translation has gone through a revolution. Translators were once completely invisible, and translations championed just by a few passionate visionaries. Now, there's an amazing range of independent publishers who are absolutely thriving and putting out wonderful books. There are Alma Books and Other Stories, Bitter Lemon Press, Comma Press, Gallic Books, Maclehose Press, Pushkin Press, Pyrene Press, Portobello Books. It's quite a list. And the percentage of books published in Britain that are translated from another language has gone up from 3 to 4%, which is good. And this year's Independent Foreign Fiction Prize, which is going to be announced here later, had a record number of entries, 126 books translated from 30 different languages. And of course, with the arrival of the internet, a whole new door has opened, offering new opportunities of getting information about the books there, books that are available out to all of you. We can get a clear idea of who is buying what and of reader taste thanks to Goodreads. Do any of you know Goodreads? On which I looked up the most popular translated fiction books. Goodreads, for those of you who don't know, it's that online library of about 25 million members whose friends, that everyone recommends books to each other, basically. And the most popular title is Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, the 19th century. Right up to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, of course, 100 Years of Solitude, Carlos Ruiz Zafon's The Shadow of the Wind, and Murakami's Kafka on the Shore. Nice cross-section. Traditionally, books are sold through intermediaries like wholesalers and libraries and book-selling chains and the trade press. And a community of fans and readers are built up thanks to author tours and signings and interviews and being on TV, if you're lucky enough to get onto TV. And every town these days has a literary festival. And book reviews, of course, are important. Spoken word events, word of mouth, browsing, leaflets handed out at conferences, library reading groups, local bookshops, friends and family. And all of this now is increasingly being echoed online through various different websites and organizations. And literary editors and their reviewers act like a filter to select good books from all the mountains of books they receive every week. A review is actually, well, it's free advertising, really. But is that controversial? Well, we could talk about that. And an endorsement, since the critic usually has a good reputation, which gives them real credibility as an opinion former. But of course, getting a review is very competitive. So again, with the arrival of the internet and, of course, Amazon, doors have opened and readers can be reached directly. So there are book sharing sites and blogs and social media all now are essential as part of all the author promotional package, if you like. And the author can have their own website, build an email list of fans, communicate on Twitter. Some can do fabulous promotional stunts on YouTube if they're very extrovert, and you can run competitions, you can do giveaways, you can have book clubs. I mean, it's lots of opportunities. And of course, getting a ranking spike on Amazon is something that a lot of authors fret about. And I'm told by a friend who's a writer that we're not talking 5 or 10. You need apparently at least 100 reviews to get to the #1 slot for the search list for whatever type of genre your book fits into. Libraries, that's another library thing. It's a community of 1,700,000 book lovers who share books and get early reviews from authors and publishers. It's a library stroke online book club. There are paid promotion sites that have readers who go and check them out and follow all the writers who are on there. Anyway, there's lots of opportunities in the new virtual world. So when a marketing manager, marketing person to publisher is planning a promotion, they're likely to ask questions such as, what does your reader want? How do they make their choices to buy this book and not that book? How do they think? What would they like? What would they not like? What will trigger them to buy the book or click on that button, on the Amazon buy button? Where do they go for information? What blogs do they read? Who buys the translations? Endless list of questions. So this afternoon, very distinguished panel of key players in the field of books and translation to answer these questions and maybe bring out more questions and have a debate, interesting discussion. We've got Claire Armitstead, books editor for The Guardian and The Observer, which reflects the move of The Guardian and Observer to a unified digital-first operation. And Claire also presents a weekly books podcast and is really just a fantastic activist for books and ideas. Yeah. Tassia Dorkok-Fikis is the editor of English Pen's Atlas, as well as a freelance editor and publicist. She used to work as publicity director at Random House and most recently at Portobello Books. Laura McLaughlin is a bookseller and freelance literary translator from Spanish and Catalan. She has worked in the book trade since 2002, starting life in Waterstones in Cork as a Christmas temp. After spending time in South America and getting a master's in literary translation at the University of East Anglia, she fell back into bookselling in 2007, working at various stores in London before taking up her current role as regional commercial manager, Kent and Sussex for Waterstones. And she's translated for Pairini, Transworld and Europa editions. And lastly, we have Mr. John Siciliano, over from America, who's executive editor at Penguin Random House. He publishes writers from around the world, classics, so therefore dead and alive, for Viking, Penguin Classics. His list includes books from France, Spain, Italy, Macedonia, Turkey, essentially a delirious number of countries from around the world. And they include, of course, the international bestseller, The Truth About the Harry Quebert Affair by Joel Dicker, 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northrop. There once lived a woman who tried to kill her neighbor's baby. Scary fairy tales by Ludmila Petrushevskaya. And that's, well, there's a long list. So, over to you. Each will introduce themselves, and then we're going to have a general debate, and then you come in the last 15 minutes with all kinds of questions. So, Claire, do you want to start?
Hello.
Kick off.
I've just got a few little facts and actually some questions that I think maybe we ought to think about a bit. I did an audit that the 3% figure of literature read in translation is it published in translation or read? Published in translation. It's gone up to 4. Well, I thought, well, I'd do a little audit of the Guardian Review, which is our main weekly literary supplement. And over the last 3 weeks, we have had 8 works, pieces that dealt with literature in translation. That's out of a possible of 72, which is over 10%. It's not good particularly, but it's over 10%. And so that includes 2 non-fiction reviews from Polish and Danish, 3 paperback reviews from Spain, former Yugoslavia and France, 2 columns from Germany and Korea, and 1 fiction review from China. So it's not perfect, but it's better than the 3% that's always quoted. I think that we have got, as newspapers have got better. We do always now mention, except when we're very dozy, translator names, which were often missed out. Georgia mentioned Tolstoy. I grew up with Tolstoy, not even realizing he was in translation. As far as I was concerned, Tolstoy was part of the canon, the literary canon that I read, which has its strengths and its weaknesses. I would also make a defence of us, particularly in England or in the English language, that we have huge territories around the world that literatures that are foreign literatures but are written in English. And if you look at Africa 39, which is the list that's just been published, it includes writers like Dino Mengistu, Hanifa Mohammed, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who are all claimed as African writers on Africa 39, but we wouldn't review them as writers in translation. Obviously, they're not in translation. We would just review them as part of our normal reviewing load. I think one of the things you need to have visionary individuals, and you need to have talented writers to bring a literature to the foreground, and I think we've seen that with Scandinavian crime recently, which has become the crime. It's what we mostly read now. Certainly in The Guardian, we did a Joe Nesbo profile at the weekend, which was read by something like 72,000 people over the weekend. It's hugely popular. But also, I did an interview with Tash Orr at House earlier in the week, and he was talking about how he and Tan Tuan Eng, that's two writers, had sort of forged a new Malaysian literature, and they've both been on Bookalong lists. So they've suddenly brought a literature to the fore, which wasn't foregrounded at all. However, I do think that there are particular problems, and often with particular territories. And we've got one here, which is Korea, that I went over to Korea, and I know nothing about Korean literature. All I've read about Korea are stories from exiles. And looking at the literature, I think that there has been a historic problem with translation, that it's often translated by academics who aren't necessarily totally fluent in the English language as they are in their language of origin, or by what I call sort of academics, sort of university translations. And I'm sure this is going to change, and then huge strides are being made. But I do think that there's a big job to be done in terms of fostering translation, as well as expecting newspapers to review translated literature.
Hi. So what we are trying to do, my current role is at the Pen Atlas, which is a website magazine that's attached to the English Pen, where we actually have once per week we publish a piece written by somebody from somewhere else, and it's usually a piece in translation, which will either comment on what's going on in culture or in politics, or just give some exposure to books that are published here at the moment and people haven't heard of these writers. The idea is very much to bring to the English reader and to publishers, or to British reader and to publishers, people that they haven't heard of and who are worth reading and worth seeing sort of regularly. So it's sort of repeating, using them to give commentary on politics, for example. So if we have, there is a Ukrainian writer published at the moment in the UK and or in the US, and we will ask them to comment about what's going on there. And we hope that with that, people will start looking for books as well, and they will be sort of referring back to what they have written. And we also introduce completely new writers that haven't been published here, but have been published in many countries elsewhere. So if people won prizes, have been published in a few languages, then often we would have a piece written by them to emphasize their presence, to in a way help publishers find them. So it's sort of various services, directly to readers, to publishers, and to writers' community, and to translators as well. And when I look at what we choose there, which writers we publish, it's very much informed by my previous experience as a publisher. I used to work at Portobello, and I published translated fiction. And also as a publicist, because before Portobello I worked at Random House and I worked at Harville, where I publicized books in translation, and I would take writers, around the country and to festivals, and I would ask them to go to these various bookshop events with very few people attended, and so it's sort of the process. I can see how it started. And I don't want, and I want to choose writers that make sense and that will help them being noticed. And at the same time, I think that the picture has changed hugely in the UK at the moment. And that 1%, it doesn't sound a lot, that 4%, but I think there's been a lot of change, and people are much more interested. And even looking at the proliferation of various magazines, online magazines that deal with translated literature, it's really much more encouraging at the moment. And maybe even if just the change of the perspective, because before maybe people could go to many bookshops and look at books there, but now it's much more direct. And so I think it's not a bad image at the moment. It's not a bad picture.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. One of the questions that was kicking around in my head when thinking about the subject matter for this panel was, can you hear? No? Yeah? Was who buys translations? And the very short answer for me as a bookseller, rather than as a translator, is everyone. Everyone buys them in different forms. There's some fantastic books that are being translated, but it depends on the market and where you are as to how they buy those books or where they find those books to buy. Some of the stores that I buy for, that I work with, could put a table of translated works in, and they will sell based on the fact that they are translated books that are really good, because the market, the readers in these areas, really want to read books in translation, and they will look for those books. They will find them, they will see them on the table, they'll go, yes, that's what I want. In other more or less maybe traditionally literary or upmarket stores, if you want to say that, they just want good books. They want those great books. And for example, some of the bestsellers that we've had in Waterstones over the last couple of years, I think John's published one of them, The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out of a Window and Disappeared, has been a bestseller for months and months. I think since publication in July 2012. It has not.
Title.
It's a great title. It is a very catchy title. Yeah, it's a very catchy title. Well done, John. But those people, the people who are buying those books, aren't necessarily going, I want something in translation. They want a great read. The title has caught them. The marketing has been perfect. It has found its place within the market, and it fits it exactly right. The other thing is that I think is crucial is there's so many books being published. There's so much being published. It's almost overwhelming. I mean, I find as a bookseller, I've worked in it so long, I can negotiate the amount of literature that's out there more easily than other people. There are people who come into the stores that I work in who might visit a bookshop much less frequently than I would as a reader. And there is so much. They need some kind of guide. And what I'm finding more and more, both in both aspects of my work as a translator and as a bookseller, is that they will find someone whose taste aligns with theirs, and they will go with what those people recommend. And in many cases, they're bloggers. There's so many very, very powerful blogs about literature at the moment, and they will go for translators in some cases. I had in the last branch that I worked full time on the shop floor, there was a little community who absolutely adored Margaret Jewel Costa's translations and would read them, would come in and seek out her translations. Reviewers in a lot of cases, The Guardian, The Observer, The Independent Foreign Fiction Prize, they're all things that can hook a reader into reading things they might not have come across otherwise. And in some cases, and in a lot of cases, it's still bookshops and booksellers. The one that stands out for me a lot is a book. I will point out that I was working in Camden, which is a very mixed market, very interesting market as a bookseller, and we sold, I can't remember, well over 100 copies of a book that never received a review in the UK, never once received a review, translated from Catalan, and it's a great translation as well, I must say. Not by me. Translated by Peter Bush. Never received a single review in the UK. It has, again, an extremely catchy title. It was called I Love You When I'm Drunk. So it did sell brilliantly. But I mean, it sold without anything other than someone saying, I love this book, and giving a pithy kind of, this is why I love this book. And it sold without any review. So it can happen. It's a matter of the readers being able to identify those people whose reviews they agree with or reviews make them want to read. And they're happening more and more digitally, not just in newspapers, not just in traditional bookshops, bricks and mortar. Part of the reason that Amazon is so powerful is because they hung in there, for a long time, making a loss, and they harness the power of readers reviewing books and readers recommending to other readers, and that's why they're so powerful. I mean, you know, this it's just that power of recommendation, and I think that's the thing that's key to, you know, putting translations where they need to be for people to read them.
Well, it sounds like you're making a great argument for, you know, books with catchy titles, and you know, I'm a firm believer in that. Although I have to, I can't take credit for the man who, what is it? The 100-year-old man who jumped out of the window, whatever it is. I did not publish that. In fact, I turned that book down 6 times. And I'd love to hear from, you know, after the session, I'd love to hear from people who've read that, because it's mystifying to me why that book is popular. But it does have a great title, and that was very tempting. So yeah, I think the central question here is as Georgia has posed it, is what do readers want? And it's such an elusive calculus. I mean, I don't think anybody knows what readers want. And you know, the Goodreads list that you've made reference to is really fascinating, and I think instructive. It tells us that people want books that everybody else is reading, that people want books that they've heard of. And I think my job as a publisher is to try to identify first a book that I like, and I love, and have some hope that other people will respond in the same way, and then to figure out how to take that book and improve it editorially and make it something irresistible, and then to find readers, to get the book talked about, to make it a book that people will have heard of. And that's a real challenge when publishing translated fiction, because often I can't read the book. You know, I don't read all these languages. And without that first test, the test of a reader, you know, how can I know, based on what someone else tells me about it, or what the title is, or what the synopsis is, whether I'm going to respond to it in a way that's going to call me to be its advocate to my colleagues, and call my colleagues to be its advocate to booksellers and to the media. So I think foreign publishers and literary agents do a great service to the fate of translated fiction in English by commissioning sample translations, and I've been very fortunate to be able to, courtesy of these publishers and agents, evaluate a foreign book on the basis of a substantial portion of it in English. And what else? So yeah, so the job is to identify a book that I respond to and hope that others will respond to it, and then to be able to kind of talk about the book in terms of other books that people have demonstrated that they love. And that's really, you know, what the job of a publisher is, how to market a book so that it approaches the kind of you know, Amazon.com algorithm, you know, that says, you know, people who bought this book also bought that book. And, you know, to your point that to go into a bookstore, it can be very overwhelming, especially people who don't go into bookstores that frequently. I mean, you know, many books are published every week. They're on display for a very short amount of time. And most books don't get reviewed. So you know, the cover of the book is really an advertisement, and you've got to, you know, have your book, hope that your book is going to stand out among the, you know, tens and dozens of other books on the table, and among the many other tables in that store, and catch that reader's attention in the half second that it has the chance to do that. And it can do that with the title, it can do that with the cover, and the title and the cover, you know, are intended, you know, a good title and a good cover kind of make visual reference to something else that it might be like, you know. So yeah, it's our job really to kind of talk about a book in terms of other books, and that's really what service a publisher is providing by being, you know, students of the marketplace.
So, so what you're saying is it's curiosity, passion. It's a chain reaction, really, isn't it? What we're all talking about is a chain reaction from the you read it, you love it, then in the publisher, everyone, and then all the way down, then into the bookshop, into the street, into the bus, and then of course now into the virtual universe. So it's I know I'm just seeing this vision. It's like a series of little communities, and that's the thing, how all those communities hook up, and that's the magic. Because then suddenly, you know, think of it: the editor who bought Harry Potter for Bloomsbury and left the company before it was successful. You know, but whoomph, it went off down. Anyway, I spoke to Jane Aitken at Gallic Books. Gallic, they make the very best of French writing available to English readers, and they also have a bookshop, so it's a sort of double act, publisher and bookshop, Belgravia Books. And she was saying, a bit like you were saying, yes, that people come in looking for something a little bit different. So that's maybe the thing also with translations, and what you were saying about the power of recommendation, blogs, and of course is that I mean, certainly I will, for my books, I will go to The Guardian, of course, because that is just an amazing, there's so much going on there. You could spend days and not do any work. And and also, of course, Words Without Borders, which is a fabulous, and that absolutely the focus is on translation. It's an American website, but it showcases each month different countries and all kinds of writers, and they also publish collections. And so there is an amazing, Now, how are you all on Twitter? Do you like to Twitter? Because publishers love to Twitter. Do you Twitter? How's your Twittering? No? You're all Twitter.
I'm the Twitter queen of The Guardian.
Ooh!
we have about 650,000 followers.
Wow.
And we use it, and I zone our tweets internationally. So we tweet overnight.
Zone your tweets.
Yeah, we'll schedule for Australia at night, India early in the morning.
Oh my God.
UK, America, obviously UK, and we do that now with our copy as well. We've disaggregated the print product from the website, and we absolutely see ourselves as an international operation, and we observe the waking hours of the countries that we're aiming the copy at.
And do you have the Guardian's special Twitter trends? What's trending? Do you know what's... No, is that maybe trending at the moment? I mean, do you look at... Because, you know, that's the whole thing with Twitter. You listen... You put out the twittering, but then if you're putting out a lot of different stories and messages, do you feed that back and see? Do you have there's a Guardian Twitter trend. I mean, what at the moment is trending?
What at the moment is trending? Oh well, I tell you what, it's poems that make men weep. Has been trending massively. We've had, and it's been largely through social media, and it's currently running at about 140,000 reads in 2 days. So when these things get the wind in their sails, they really get the wind in their sails. And we now have data analytics that you can read minute by minute what territories they're being read on, what device they're being read on, how many people are reading them at any 1 minute. It can drive you completely mad. That's why I look a bit crazy.
Hardly. So
we do it, and I do it, but I do it in a much more targeted way, because obviously, I don't have the power of The Guardian, but the people I try to follow and the people I try to tag are people that I know are interested in translation issues and in fiction and bookshops, and so it's sort of to generate some interest in almost in the audience that I know is going to be interested. So in a way, it's almost like preaching to the converted, but each time, if you get a few more people interested and a few more retweets, it does help along. And then obviously the pen does their own tweets as well, and their own hard work.
My Twitter account is a personal one, so so I don't use it. It's not primarily for my work, apart from it being related to translation, my own translations and things. Probably 3/4. I don't have that many followers or anything, but probably 3/4 are in some way related to translation or literature. And a lot of it tends to be, again, as I said, I know I've mentioned this earlier, but communities that develop, and one of the ones, like, a lot of them are to do with the Emerging Translators Network, where we all just talk about what we're working on and what we're reading and things like that. So it's it's still about literature and translation, but it's not tied into my work as such.
I don't tweet.
But your authors, I suppose the authors, your authors have to tweet.
It's incumbent upon them to tweet. I go on Twitter under the guise of Penguin Classics. I hide behind the @PenguinClassics handle, and it's fascinating to see how our content is being picked up and talked about and retweeted. And I think it's essential. It's really just an extension of. It's another form of conversation, so in the same way that I can talk about a book and get someone excited about it and hope that there will be a chain reaction, it's there, it's documented in type. And certainly we're, earlier and earlier we're trying to get books into people's hands to get the conversation started, just because there's so much competition for and so much noise.
Because perhaps thinking of with bookshops, also how bookshops, that you were talking earlier about the sort of bricks and mortar, so to speak, and the virtual, and how in terms of bookshops you've got rather adventurous new ways. It's like Mr. B's Emporium of Reading Delights in Bath, and they have a book spa. Or that's right. They call themselves a reading spa, and they have on their website, this is their marketing puff, is cream shelves packed with books span 3 floors of a pretty Georgian building with lots of added quirky features, such as a converted clawfoot bath book display, a wall papered with Tintin comics. Don't know about copyright on that. Toilets papered in book reviews, a rentable reading booth with a leather chair and a biscuit barrel, and a bibliotherapy room. Anyway, people are finding all kinds of novel ways to sell or attract people, so it becomes sort of a reading experience, so to speak. But so I don't know what your views are about that, or is it just very clever marketing?
I don't think it's just clever marketing, actually. I'm a bookseller, have been for a long time. I absolutely believe in the importance of bricks and mortar bookshops being on our high street. I'm not just saying that personally as a bookseller. I think it's hugely important for someone to be able to walk in and find something that they didn't know they wanted, because algorithms and recommendations can work once you know that's there. The chances of, and this again hugely ties into why libraries are important. It is really important for someone to have a space to be able to go and read and look at books and think about books and handle books. I think that's hugely important, and it is becoming more and more important, I think, to make it I suppose more of a destination. Places like Topping Books as well. What's the name of that really beautiful bookshop in Olney? Begins with a B. Doesn't matter. It's absolutely gorgeous. But it's not just that they're places for commercial activities to take place. And I think possibly the book trade in some ways before was probably trying to make it a bit more, not hip, but try and make it more transactional. And in a lot of ways, Waterstones is certainly returning more to the idea of bookshops as a place to enjoy books and think about books, and tapping into the experience that people expect of places now. They want more than just tables of books. They want events. They want lots of things going on. They want people thinking about things. So I think it's all to the good, to be honest. Yes. I like all that.
Well, there is the whole also trend of doing literary events that are attached to a publishing house, yes, like Pairini, Salon. And I think they work very well, and you manage to get loyal readers who love their events, and then they will come to any event irrespective of the writer, because they know what they're publishing, how good the books are. So that's again, they've managed to find find readers who like their literary taste, and there's an issue of trust. And I think there are a few publishers who do similar things. Yep.
Well, is that
I should have said publishers as well, because there's absolutely, like, And Other Stories, Pairini, where they foster a very, very specific voice, a very specific kind of readership, and it works really well. It works brilliantly because the Pyrini salons are absolutely incredible. They're really, really good fun, and genuinely, it's lovely to spend an evening just talking about books. It's fantastic.
They're also successful. I mean,
Yeah.
Pyrini's one. I think they had they say that more and more people are coming, and they are often sold out before very early on, and
Right.
so.
Just sort of broadening it out, I think it does come back to communities, but it also we had we've opened we have a first book prize, and we opened it out to our readers, and they actually discovered And Other Stories down the rabbit hole. Who would have thought it, a novella in translation. Now that was brought to us by our readers. I don't know whether we would necessarily have reviewed it even, because we didn't know the publisher. It was brand new, it was their first book, and so I think that there's a whole way in which the sort of broadening out has to readers, and the monolithic structures are beginning to break down, and I think that's hugely helpful for translated literature.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because I was also thinking there's the Clerkenwell Salon and Book Slam, which kind of, I don't know if that's like a rock book kind of, I don't know. But yes, all these initiatives. But what you were saying about people coming to bookshops and that the importance of hand selling, I think maybe that is also still the thing that the internet, of course, doesn't have, is there's nothing like holding a book and just browsing, which of course lots of more digital toys, if you like, are being invented. I heard that book snacking. Have you heard of book snacking? That's a new tool for marketing. Anyway, no, yes, challenge it.
I challenge that. I think you can hold an ebook if you get excited. When I went to Korea last week, and I got all these ebooks,
Great.
and it was so exciting. I got these ebooks.
So then, are you reviewing them?
I've podcasted on them and written about them. Yes, but they're not available.
Okay.
They're not available in bookshops in this country. A lot of them are old. Well, they will be, because there are various great initiatives that are beginning to happen. But I don't think that. I think we can fetishize the book too much, and actually it's the literature. And sometimes actually you need to get people comparing ebooks.
Yes. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Absolutely. But then, and also authors at festivals and spoken word. I mean, that also the building up of the community. Virtual and in bookshops, because you were talking about bookshop events are well attended now, because I do remember back in the day, especially with translated authors coming over, and so you had to think of gigs, or you'd tie them up. You'd have a visiting foreign author who might be huge in their own country, and then also a bit of an upsetting thing for the ego. There's 3 people at your English book reading. But then you would link them up with English writers, because writers love to talk to each other. So what kind of things have you used in publicity, the classic publicity, that you can translate across now that you're doing stuff with pen, ideas to generate?
Again, I guess is trying to find out literary tastes and compare them, and hope, and it's sort of that matching services, so you find a book and you think, who has ever loved that author in the past, and could they maybe comment on this, or could they do an event together? I mean, I don't do that for pen now, but in the past that would be exactly what I was hoping for, that you have a well-known writer, British writer, who will do something with a new writer in translation. But I think generally there are more and more successful events nowadays, and festivals have opened up. The more, again, I think people do come. I think that when we started, when I did it for Harville, I remember these sort of windy little tents in Edinburgh with really not many people there, and there will be this exactly great European writer who feels that we should revere him or him usually, and then it turns out that there is nobody there, or that nobody understands, and the translation is terrible, and so I think everybody's much more professional about it now. But at the same time, I counted. Hey, just put online their program, and there are 13 writers in translation, which I think for the huge, so it's 2 writers per day. That's not that many, I think. And Oxford Festival had 3 or 4. And the event that they had with Jacek Hugo-Bader, who is a Polish reportage writer, was a sellout, and it really worked fabulously well. But at the same time, why didn't they have more? So.
Also, I think translators are now getting more involved. That's really important, to bring on the translator. And sometimes, for example, I know that Galic's bestseller, The Elegance of the Hedgehog, Muriel Barbaret, the author, is actually completely reclusive. You do get authors who don't actually want to go on stage. So then what? So then you have to find other ways for, and very often translators are very helpful, and all of, yeah. So.
And I guess you could do it some other way. You could have an actor reading from the book. You could, there are ways of doing an interesting event, which is not how how we did it in the past. It could be. You could have music, you could have drinks. I mean, it could be everything. Could be an event that's an appealing thing in itself, rather than a boring reading. So.
Oh
well,
yes.
Well, yeah. So you're all pointing to a real hurdle in publishing books in translation, in that in most cases the author is not around, not of it. I mean, I published the Penguin Classics too, so that's another hurdle. That's the same hurdle when you're publishing books by dead writers. The author is not available; it's not there. Although in many cases there's name recognition, so there's a brand there. There's already awareness of who this is and what he or she represents. In the case of a translated author, there's not an author in many cases, or if there is an author. In many cases, the author can't speak English, and there's, in most cases, not an awareness of who this author is and what this author represents. And I think, I think we've noticed that there are a number of small publishers that have emerged over the last few years that are dedicated to translation, and that's really inspiring and wonderful. And I think it has to be that way. Because these are publishers that represent something very specific, and they publish books of a kind in a way, and they attract a loyal following, and that feeds on itself and allows them to get a readership for every new non-English speaking author with an unpronounceable name. What Penguin can do is, Penguin has unsurpassed brand recognition, and we publish books for everyone, so we can't just be publishing works in translation. We can't operate like And Other Stories, or like Open Letter, or like New York Review Books, or like Europa Editions, and cultivate that that kind of focused following. But we provide a kind of context for writers in translation, because we, as a brand, we represent something, and we can kind of the brand has a following, and if we welcome a Macedonian author, for example, I published a Macedonian author a few years ago, to the fold, that author is implicitly supported by this community of Penguin authors, for whom the readership kind of feels some level of affection.
Okay, well, thank you. Now, how about opening to all of you? Have any thoughts, any questions? And you've got, she's got the microphones coming.
I just wanted to ask a question. I, as a reader, find it really hard to find translated books. And I was just wondering what you think can be done in terms of kind of on the shop floor, or online or offline, to kind of increase awareness of translated books. I'm thinking of things like on Amazon. I don't think you can search to find books that have been translated, or books that are from a certain region. So what more do you think can be done in that respect?
That's how I searched Goodreads. Well, when I searched Goodreads, I put in most popular translated fiction, and an enormous great list came up. I mean, it's true, Amazon is also by author, so if you have favorite authors, and then there's that, what do they do? Is it marketing by recognition? What is it? If you've bought a book by a certain writer, then they'll suggest 10 others or something. I can't remember, there's a name for that kind of... so if you've got an account with Amazon, maybe... I mean, let's hope also you buy through other channels, incidentally. But anyway, I mean, what do you...
My feeling would be, if you find a reviewer who routinely does review translated literature, there are so many really good book blogs about translation, like Winston's dad is one of them that I think of all the time. Winston's dad comes up a lot. Find those blogs and use them. They're absolutely fantastic. They're usually really passionate about the books they're reading and really give a good measured... They're not promoting them to say, oh, we love every single book, but they give you a good overview of what's out there as well. I would say use the digital community as much as you can. Also, I mean, places like... In my stores in Kent and Sussex, it would be Horsham, Tunbridge Wells would be the ones that really go after translated literature because their readers, the people in those areas, really want to read them. So it's about finding those kind of advocates that love translated literature as much as you obviously are interested in. That would be my advice. I mean, it is very grassroots. It's still very grassroots. Words Without Borders is a fantastic resource as well. But I would say make as much use as you can of find that there's a dedicated community out there. It's just about tapping into it, I think.
There's an ex-publisher, when I worked at Portobello, and I used to find our books on a table that was labelled translated fiction. It often used to annoy us because we felt that we were put into one category, and you wanted it to be everywhere else as well. So, is it the pros and cons of this approach?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's funny because it does work in some of my stores. It works perfectly. It works brilliant because they're seeking them out. In others, that will put them off. Yeah, and for example, with things like The 100-Year-Old Man, The Shadow of the Wind, a lot of people didn't, other than the author's surname, people didn't know. They just read it because they wanted to read it. They'd heard it was a great book. And I suppose I'm returning a little bit to the question of what readers want, and what they want to read is great books. That's what they want. They'll read them if they're I don't believe the kind of the chestnut that readers are necessarily put off by translations. They're not. They might be put off by the idea that it's being pigeonholed into a fiction and translation table, but they want great books. It doesn't, to me, I don't think it matters where they come from. They want the great books.
Yeah, translation can be a virtue, but we're never really, we're rarely selling a translation. We're rarely selling a book because it was translated. But I think the more people that emerge who are interested in this, the more content there is, and there is a lot more content now competing for our attention, and the more people who come out in search of a specific kind of content are served by content providers that cater to specific interests, like in the case of some of these small publishers that publish exclusively in translation. And some of the ones that have been very successful now have great relationships with, for example, in the United States, many independent bookstores that devote shelf space, specific sections of the stores to their books. So, for example, there are many stores that have dedicated Penguin classic sections. There are many independent stores in the United States that have sections devoted to the books that are published by Europa Editions. In fact, there's a store in Manhattan called Idlewild Books that publishes, whose mission is to sell books from around the world. And you walk in, and it's organized as if you're in a bookstore that sells only travel guides. So it's Europe and Asia and Africa, but alongside the travel guides are works of fiction and literature.
Daunts in Marylebone do that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Well, hi there. I'm Malcolm Burgess from Oxygen Books. We publish the City Picks series, which is kind of best writing on different cities, quite a lot in translation. But we are quite poppy, I'm afraid. We go with a teaching adage, you've got to do the unknown through the known. You've got to have the well-known writers, and on the back of those you can bring in different writers. I've just finished running a series of Readers' Days funded through the Arts Council, We work with people like Tracy Chevalier, Kate Moss, Helen Dunmore, who write about different countries, different cities, but then start discussing writers in translation from those cities and countries. And then on the back of that, in our Readers' Days, we brought in, can I say, writers in translation, publishers, whatever, working together. But, you know, and I totally agree with what you're saying. People don't think in terms of translation.
Yeah, exactly.
They just think in terms of bloody good writing.
Exactly.
And there's a huge, insatiable desire for this out there. But as you're saying, it's how do you fill this need? How do you reach these people?
Yeah.
The French Institute did a fantastic series, I think it was year before last. They had like Simon Sharma on Colette, David Nichols on Truffaut. And just thinking, you know, the chap from Penguin, your fantastic classics list, loads of fantastic, you know, work in translation. Okay, a lot are dead. But you've got the modern, the translators, the people who've written the introduction. And on the back of that, you can actually promote other translated writing. You know, there's a real world out there, real opportunities. It does require quite a lot of effort. And the last thing I'll say is, I think the whole thing about smaller publishers and bigger publishers working together. We are all in the same boat. And I think, you know, from our Readers' Days perspective, you know, that totally worked. By the way, there's only like 3 or 4 cities. But I do think this has to be the way ahead. Just a thought anyway. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I will admittedly say I'm biased, which is why I'd like to ask you guys. I'm interested in translation that shows that it's translation, and I'm not necessarily saying keep it strange, keep it foreign. My question is, this works better for poetry, but I wanted to ask as far as fiction. What are readers and what are publishers' thoughts on including excerpts or apps or parts of the work in the original language, or in some way incorporating the original language into not necessarily the translation, but in some sort of form the book itself? Are readers kind of scared by that sort of thing, intimidated? If they're given it, are they likely to embrace it? Or is it something that people tend to avoid? Because there are very few publishers that publish translations in both languages or in any portion of both languages. So is there a reason for that on the publisher side, on the reader side, a little bit of both? What kind of field is that?
I've done a fair amount of that, but it's mainly in books that have kind of pedagogical value. So there's a long-standing series at Penguin called Parallel Text. They're anthologies of short stories that present the English and the original language on facing pages. So that started in the 60s with Spanish, French, German, and Italian. Those languages have gone through various editions, and then a few years ago I published the first new major expansion of that series with a Japanese volume and a Chinese volume, and we have Arabic and Russian planned. But those are books that I think are, they're not what we call tradey. They're used in classrooms. They're used by autodidacts, people who are learning a language. In the Penguin Classics, we have a number of books that have either a parallel text format or the original text within the book somewhere. So, for example, I'm publishing a new translation of the Analects of Confucius, and we're including the Chinese text. A few years ago, I published a new translation of the Song of the Cid with a facing page presentation. We do it a fair amount for translated poetry, and that's also a kind of practical consideration. Poetry doesn't take up as much space. We couldn't publish a dual language edition of Crime and Punishment or The Brothers Karamazov.
Mostly when I've seen dual language literature, it tends to be authors that are dead and with name recognition. So do you guys also, or anyone, is there work being done in contemporary authors or even new authors? That might be too much of a risk to take on a new author, but is it something that people consider in the publishing world?
Well, like the man beside you from Oxygen, is it Oxygen Press? We use some of these parallel text anthologies as a way to introduce new writers. So the Japanese anthology, for example, I told the editor that, it would be great if you had a story by Haruki Murakami in there and Banana Yoshimoto in there. But, once you meet those criteria, feel free to include anyone else you wish. And he has got very interesting taste. And I also, as an editor, was very interested in seeing. I was very interested in being introduced to these other writers through this anthology to see if I can discover somebody whom I might publish in long form.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi. I've just come from a different stand over there where they were saying that of the total number of books published in the UK last year, only 3% were translations. I was wondering if you've heard about this statistic and whether or not it's correct, and if it is correct, or if you can correct it, what you think about the reasons for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's actually gone up to 4%, and it's a producer for BBC's Newsnight, who shall remain nameless, who is a friend, told me that, and I trust her. Well, I hope the BBC is still a good source for statistics, and it's anyway 4%, which shows, gives hope perhaps.
I think in literature across frontiers, I think they did actually a survey last year, didn't they? Where they compared, they had a proper assessment, and I think they realized that it went up a bit then.
Yeah.
So it's obviously
small,
little, but
small,
but still
room for hope.
Yeah.
It's moving. Yes, but much more has to be done. But as when we started this discussion, there are a great many of very enterprising, dynamic presses now. I mean, I've read out there's Alma, and other stories, Bitter Lemon, Comma, Gallic, Maclehose, Pushkin, Pairini, Portobello. I mean, there's a lot of people really passionate, doing wonderful, wonderful books. And also in America, you've got Deep Vellum, who's a very new Dalkey Archive. I mean,
New Vessel Press.
New Vessel, yes.
Europa
America as well.
editions.
Yeah. There's a lot. There is a lot.
Open Letter.
Yeah, Open Letter. That's true. Open Letter. Yeah. The thing is, as we've been saying, is how we get all this out to all of you to know that these books exist. So we've been discussing not only tours and bookshops and the trade, but also the virtual universe and how to flag them up.
Do you think it may have to do with what kind of literature children are exposed to in school, or maybe secondary or high school? In my home country, I remember being sort of exposed to a lot of different literature from around the world translated into my home language. And I was wondering if, because I know that here is not necessarily the case. Some kids will get that, some kids will not. But do you think it might have to do with that?
Languages maybe.
And what was your original home language? Where? Romanian. Oh, okay, Romanian. So what were you reading? Harry Potter? No.
No, I'm a bit old for that.
Yes.
Generally translations from a lot of different languages, authors from Western Europe, from the Middle East, from Asia, and this was all from secondary school up into high school and university. And I didn't do any degree related to literature at all. So it's just, do you think it has to do with that, or with the cultivation of foreign language, foreign culture in the UK?
It might have something to do with that. On the other hand, as Claire said earlier, I mean, there is the whole wealth of Australian, South African, there's so much Indian, some that we also read here, that I think the choice is huge. And in terms of foreign writers for children, or books in translation, that, again, that has picked up a bit. And Pushkin, for example, have published quite a lot recently. And I think lots of other publishers, you know, big established publishers, are actually looking back and reissuing foreign classics for kids. So I think it's better now. It's not, you know.
The message is largely positive. Small is beautiful, but growing.
I also think, when you're talking about children, you know, think about Pippi Longstocking, or we don't think of those as Emil and the
fairy
Detectives. You
tales
don't
of
think
the
of them. I
Brothers
don't think of them
Grimm
as
or
books
Hans
in
Christian
translation.
Andersen.
Children, we read them because they're great literature. It doesn't even occur to us.
But then with Emil and the Detectives, all the other books have now been reissued, all his previous books. Yeah.
And of course, a good translation, you should read it as though it's not a translation. Because a good translation reads as though it was obviously originally written in English, even if actually, anyway, it wasn't. But
That could be a whole other panel.
Yeah, that's a whole other panel, yeah. So I think we are out of time. Thank you all very much. And if any more questions, do come and say hello. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to a wonderful panel.